Hi, I'm Nelleke, and this is Misha, and we are here because we want to tell you about TAAL. TAAL is the Tyndale Academy of Ancient Languages in the Netherlands. Yeah, we want to share something about what we do and how we do things and why we do things that way. So, Misha, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, so I am Mezhusevi, Zutso. That's a tribal name. A lot of people struggle to, but in short, Meza, or in the class, in the Greek class, normally I am called Marcos. People do call me Mark in India, and I'm from the northeast of India in a state called Nagaland. I grew up in the Christian family, gave my life to Christ when I was 13 and went to seminary at 18.
For and your wife is Polish, right?
Yes, my wife is Polish, and we currently live in Poland.
I'm Nelleke. That's a Dutch name. My father is English, so I'm a mixture of Dutch and English, and I'm married to a Ghanaian. So we have five different nationalities represented in just this screen. I also grew up in a Christian family, and I was 14 when I made a conscious decision to let Jesus be the most important person in my life. Later on that year, I was reflecting on what had some choices to make at school and reflecting on what God wanted me to do. And I really felt a calling to get involved in Bible translation work.
Mhm.
So I studied Hebrew and yeah, spent a few years in Ghana working in Bible translation work. Then met my husband, and then we did some development work, and for many years. And now we live in the Netherlands, and we are also involved in our mission agency, but also at Tyndale Theological Seminary, where I teach Hebrew. So that's where we are today.
Yep.
Now, Misha, you've been teaching Greek online. No, you started teaching Greek in seminary, but then after a number of years, something happened and it radically changed your view on teaching biblical languages. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I went to seminary at 18, and then I did my bachelor of theology for 3 years, and in that we took like I think a semester of Greek. I was very excited that I would be learning Greek and reading the Bible in the original language, but that course was not good. Was not good. And then, but after bachelor's, when I was thinking of a master's, I really wanted to learn Greek and Hebrew. And for that reason, I chose a seminary in India, which is known for their emphasis on biblical languages. And so I did an integrated MTH in Asian Christian Academy in the south of India. And that's where I learned Greek and Hebrew. And I was passionate. I was very passionate about Greek that I ended up writing my thesis on the verbal aspect. Was in 2014, 15. So the debate about whether Greek verbs encodes time or aspect was a big deal. So I wrote on the perfect verb. That tells I'm very passionate about the language. But even during that time, there was a key moment where I got more interested in the language. Was during my MTH, I was asked to preach in the village back home in Nagaland, and that's where I took out. I was already doing exegesis, and so I took out my Greek Bible and also my native Bible, which is the Tenide. We call it Tenide,
Hmm.
and I was reading through it and trying to do an exposition of it. And then I realized there are few key differences. And then that I thought could be translated better into my language. And
Hmm.
so, and then I started asking around about who did the translation and how they did it. And I realized that they did it from the English and they did it with different people. Different people were doing different parts of the Bible, and so I also saw a lot of inconsistencies in the translation. And so I thought, that was a key moment for me to get more
Hmm.
interested in just not the language but also Bible translation.
Yeah.
And so in summary, we use the grammar translation method like any other evangelical college.
What do you mean by the grammar translation method? Can you explain that?
A grammar translation method would is learning the language primarily through grammar. Yeah, we learn the grammar, and then we learn how to analyze it. Is it a masculine? Is it feminine? Is it plural? Is it a verb?
Hmm.
Participle? And so we learn the grammar, and the goal is to be able to parse the words, and then be able to translate eventually the Bible and or the Greek. And so that's how I learned. And after I graduated in 2015, and I started right from there. I started teaching Greek in the seminary. First, for 2 years in Nagaland, I was just teaching Greek, and then I also taught in South India again for another 3 years. So I taught with what I've learned. I taught with the same textbooks that I learned with, and but in that there were a few things I was struggling. I knew the textbook that I was teaching, but I was always struggling how to make this language, exciting or interesting or
Mm.
enjoyable. That was one of the questions. And me myself teaching it, I was not enjoying it. So probably it's, for those that are teaching Greek and Hebrew, they know this. But the first week are very exciting. These questions like everybody's excited, Greek, Hebrew, and then Alpha, Beta, or Aleph, Bet, and then everybody's excited that they would be reading the scriptures in original language.
Mhm.
But the moment they see more and more paradigms, the moment they see more and more tables and rules,
It's
eventually,
dead.
it's so that was a struggle, just keeping the class, and then I love the language. I struggle with it, but I love the language. I want people to love the language. But so yeah, I was teaching it. I didn't know there's any other way to teach these languages, and so that was what I was doing. And then COVID came, and in India, COVID, I think the whole world, but also particularly India, the lockdowns were longer and were harder, and
Mm.
so we were moved online. And then when we moved online, I faced huge problems in teaching, even teaching other courses, but especially Greek. Number one, I didn't know very well how to teach online. I was trying to figure out how Zoom works or how Google Meet works, and then how to share a screen. So that was one struggle. On the other hand, we were stressed out. Everybody was stressed out, and I think the worst was I didn't know how to teach it online. I was not enjoying it. The students were not learning. We eventually end up canceling the course.
Mm.
Uh, I still regret that. I always think about this this
Yeah.
story, but it was key for me. It was key for me. Then I thought, like, well, I love this language. It's important for Christians, for especially for people who have a high view of Scripture, to know the languages. And we also know that languages course is being reduced in many places now, and so I really wanted to do this well. And that was where it was locked down, and so the internet was the place we spent our time. I started searching online, and I saw a video, the Police Institute in Jerusalem, where this teacher was speaking in Greek.
Wow.
And then he was saying the most basic things. He was saying, "Take the cab, or come here, go there, fede euro," things like that. But I didn't understand what he was saying. I know I could recognize those were Greek words, but I was not sure what he was saying. But they were laughing. They were, students were enjoying, and then playing with props and toys, and they were learning. I was like, I should learn this. This looks like a better way. I have no idea that what the method or approach was, but I started watching more videos and started searching what is this method and how are people doing it. Yeah, so that was a turning point, and then I ended up learning through Biblingo. Biblingo is an app, very very good app for both for Greek and Hebrew. That was the first place I went to because I found them online, and then I started learning through them through the app, and I took a course, a live course with them. Jason Weaver was the teacher. He's now a good friend of mine. Biblingo is very friendly in the sense that it is still communicative, but it's like sort of like also very grammar based. And they use pictures and videos to illustrate, and so it was very good. That was the first time I started thinking in Greek. I didn't know that I could think in Greek. So, for instance,
How
I would
how long had you
say
been,
before.
how long had you been teaching at this point already?
So I started teaching in 2015. And till 2021, I was teaching with grammar translation method, and then from 2021 took a while, but I started playing with Biblingo, I think, and then yeah, that's where they were saying in the app that you should not translate. I didn't understand that first. Like, how would you not translate? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because my whole life I was taught how to translate, and so how would you not translate? But then that was the first time when we say ho anthropos, which is, and then immediately the Judo will say, oh, a man, a person.
Mhm.
But then
Yeah.
instead of doing that, what they were doing is they were showing the picture of a man,
Mm.
and so I didn't need to process internally saying English. I didn't need another language. It was weird at first, like, but I got used to it, and eventually was able to, process, very basic phrases in Greek. with Biblingo. But I wanted to learn more. I started teaching. I was teaching. I started teaching at Warsaw Baptist Theological Seminary as we moved to Poland, and I wanted to use this method because it was, it was working for me. It was working for me. So I thought, that's what I was looking for. I didn't understand the technique, the theoretical part of the methodology, but it was working. And so I started teaching, and then I eventually ended up in Rome, Vivarum Novum. It's a classical academy where I learned, and so that was an interesting moment there, and also that sort of a game change. It was a key moment for me. It was a summer intensive course 3 years ago. And then I said I was a Greek teacher, I'm teaching Greek in the seminary. And then I signed up, they took me, and I went to the first class, and I was so embarrassed and also so frustrated because this teacher was saying, ego Amy, and then ego Amy Gerardos. His name is Gerardo, he's a good friend, a wonderful person. Ego Amy Gerardos, Mexicanos Amy, Catoico ente Rome, ente Italia. And I'm not trained to do that. I'm like, and when I read, I could understand, figure out the textbook, but the class I was not able to follow. He was asking me basic questions like "tis a su," which means "who are you?" Which okay, "tis a su." In my mind, I need some time to process that,
Right.
and it was not automatic, and so it was very embarrassing, and I thought I would leave the course. I would not embarrass myself further, because I said I'm a Greek teacher. I cannot have this. I cannot process the basic language, even conversational. But then I ended up continuing, and then but that was the that's one of the key moments that changed my whole life of learning the language again and teaching the language. I also ended up learning at Polis Institute, Jerusalem, where I finished the course. The method is a little different, but more or less the same. They teach the language communicatively,
Mm,
or as a living language, as some of them will say. Some of them are hesitant to say it's a living language approach.
right.
Communicative language at Polis, they use a Polis method. Regardless of the name, eventually, at the end of the day, it's almost the same. You use Greek to teach
Yes.
Greek, and we can talk
So
further about what are some of the benefits of it, probably. But that was the story, and one of the key things about it was I was after an MTH and after teaching Greek for a few years, I was not able to pick up my New Testament and read it as I would want to. I could still read and parse it and then translate it, but I was not able. I was at the most be able to read the 10 verse and more. I'm already tired. My brain is tired. 10 verse because I had to analyze the whole. But after those courses and during that, it was when I was in Rome during the summer we were having an immersive course. Then on Sunday we was free, and so I thought I would read the Bible. And then I read the whole Gospel of Mark in
wow.
just in one sitting, and then I thought, wow, I've always dreamt to be able to do this, and so those are some key things, key moments for me to learn, continue to learn the language, and also teach the language with this.
So would you say this method for you, in your experience, really made the difference between being able to read and understand, but also then to be able to use it actively, use it fluently, and therefore read fluently? Because there's a huge difference between reading 10 verses and reading the whole gospel, you know?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and this is not just me, but everybody that have learned the language actively, I would say that uh, learning the language actively helps massively in reading. And the
Yes.
goal is reading. Even grammar translation, the goal is reading. Even
Yes.
living language approach, the goal is reading. Yeah, so that's what we say. If you can speak this much, you can read this much. That's what we say.
Right. Right.
But there are some it has huge value for reading and
Yeah. So some people call this the living language method. That kind of suggests that there are also dead languages. What is usually described as a dead language, and why is it called that?
yeah, I think the basic difference, very broadly, is that a living language is a language that has native speakers, and a dead language is a language which has no native speakers.
Hmm.
But we have to qualify that that does not mean we cannot speak the language. But also, from a pedagogical point of view, research have shown that our brains, they process living language and dead language the same way.
Right. So, an example of a dead language would be Latin, for instance. There's no country in the world where babies are born into a Latin family.
Mhm.
And Sanskrit, for instance, some of these Semitic languages like Ugaritic and so on, they are examples of dead languages. Now, you also said the term living language is not the only term that's used to describe this. Another way of describing it is the direct method,
Yeah.
or more extensive phrase, the direct inductive contextual method. Can you just unpack that phrase a bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, so generally, I think it's used in SLA. I think now in second language acquisition, I think communicative language teaching is the broader term for it. But there is living language approach, or active method, or immersive method, or the polis method. I use a direct method or a nature method that was started by WHD House, and for Latin and for Greek as well. And interestingly, the direct method is older than the grammar translation method. We say the traditional method is the grammar translation, but that's not the traditional method. The grammar translation started, I think, more so in the 19th century, late, I think, 19th century. But yeah, so the direct contextual method, it's called the nature method, or the direct method was popularized by especially Orbert, and to teach Latin. So we have the famous textbook Familia Romana, and but that was also adapted into Greek. And the direct inductive contextual is that term is specifically used in Vivarium Novum in the academy, and there are other places that are using it because they've produced a lot of teachers, and those teachers have ended up opening a lot of other schools in different parts of the world. And but direct simply means that Greek, for instance, or Latin, when you're teaching Latin, you are teaching and learning within the language. You're not using another language. You're not learning Greek with English, but you're learning Greek with Greek. So that would mean direct. And inductive would simply mean that students are learning the language inductively, vocabularies as well as grammar, syntax. So normally the text is graded, from you're introducing part of the grammar. Let's say in Greek, it would be the second declension nouns, and then they write sentences or stories in this second declension noun with basic verbs, and it's graded. It slowly increases. And so in that, inductive would mean that students are first introduced to the language, and then they see patterns,
Mm,
and later on the grammar rule is introduced.
right. So it's
So
like
not grammar first.
they kind of discover the
Yeah.
patterns themselves.
Yeah. So a simple example would be ho anthropos blepe. So the man sees ho anthropos blepe, ego blepo, su blepes, and then they don't know exactly what's happening, but they know something similar is happening. Blepo plays. So instead of grammar method, will say luo, lues, lue, or blepo, blepes, blepe, first person, second person, third person, and then the first thing that will be introduced will be the table. But in inductive, the table will not be introduced right away, but it will be used in a meaningful context. And that's where the next turn, inductive contextual, happens, because words have meaning in context, and words are learned better in a certain context. The context means literary, grammatical context, but also the story within which the word occurs. So they're introduced to students are introduced to exposed to the language first, and then the grammar is learned for precision and accuracy.
So it's very interesting because there are a lot of parallels to how actually we all as children have learned to speak. Now, you have also rightly said once you're an adult, you can never completely learn like a child anymore. But I think there is a lot that we can learn. And I think I like to challenge my students by saying Jesus invited us to be like children, and I think this is one of the ways in which we can try to be like children. So how does that compare? How does a child learn a language, and how, because clearly we don't sit down with our 2-year-old and say, okay, I speak, you speak, he speaks,
Yeah.
I spoke, we will speak.
Yeah, so the nature language sort of is modeled around, again, broadly modeled around how how all of us would learn a language naturally. But there is a difference between, a child learning and an adult learning, because I have two kids now who are learning Polish and English, and I'm also trying to learn Polish with them, but the kids are doing better than me.
Kids
But
always go
uh,
faster.
yeah, and so a child does not need grammar at all to learn the language. Like my son can speak fluent Polish, and his English is not as fluent as his Polish. But if I ask him what is a noun, he has no idea what's a noun. What is a singular, a plural? He has no idea. But he knows if he sees two cups, he say two cups. And so a child can learn without grammar. Because of repeated exposure to the language, and amazingly how God has created our brains to learn languages. But for an adult, we still are molded around that. But I think, and also research has shown that we need grammar to the structure of the language to learn the language, and also especially when we have limited time, because schools, seminaries, or universities teaching languages don't have a whole life to teach students. They only have students for 2 semesters, 3 or 4. And so within that, we have to meaningfully teach the language. And so grammar for sure is needed to make the language learning effective in an adult.
So how would that work? I mean, you say we do still teach the grammar. Why do you think it's still important to teach the grammar? And then how does that interact with the other way? Are you not kind of like trying to combine two ways of doing things? Doesn't that mean that we're doing both things halfway?
We're doing both things, but I think not halfway. As far as I see it, is because I think there's a misconception among people who are hesitant with the living language, especially Greek and Hebrew or Latin as well, that the communicative approach guys are just teaching people how to speak, but that's not true. It's just way more nuanced than that. And we teach grammar, but we don't teach. So in a grammar method, you teach the Greek grammar with English or Polish or German or Dutch. You use another language. So you teach about the language. You teach. That's the difference between, again, broadly grammar translation and communicative approach. Where grammar translation, you're teaching about the language and you're learning passively the language. In a living language or communicative approach, you are actively learning the language. And so even when it comes to grammar, people think that a lot of that's actually the first question. Like, so how do they understand grammar? Like, we teach grammar all the time. We just that we do it in Greek. We do it in
Right.
Greek. So instead of saying, okay, ho anthropos, it's a nominative, it's normally the subject, then we will say, o anthropos estin onomastike tosis, which means it's the nominative case, but we can say that in Greek.
Hmm.
We can say that in Greek. We have all the terms. We teach grammar explicitly and actively. Just that, again, that grammar is not the first thing that we teach in a direct method. Grammar is explained later on. Grammar is learned inductively. And I think this is where grammar is important for precision, because for students for accuracy, because you can be speaking something or hearing something and hearing it probably wrong, or speaking it wrong. And the only way to know that is through, some grammatical analysis or asking some grammatical questions. And yeah, we can do both very well. It's not, there doesn't need to be a false dichotomy, either this or that. It's just both.
So it's kind of like the best of both, not both halfway, but really the best,
Yeah.
combining the strengths of both. So it's interesting if you look at what happens in your brain when you are learning a language, and so we have these synapses in our brain, which is kind of like, let me say, the part where the information is stored. And what it turns out is that the more links you make to other synapses, the stronger the memory and the more easily it can be brought up again and used in practice. And so you have also spoken about using our different senses in learning a language. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So there's a lot there to say, but to start with, in any language, modern or ancient, there's no debate about this, that there are 4 skills that are necessary, which is listening and speaking, reading and writing. And then people would divide that into input and output. Input would be listening and reading, that is input. Output would be speaking and writing. Language is for communication. That's what Krashen said. And the best way to learn it is by communicating.
Yes.
And so those 4 skills are very important, and we have to engage those 4 skills equally in our classes. So sometimes this tension or this debate, or is it GT or is it, living language? I think in the real class, whatever you use, just engage these four skills because that's how we learn. That's how God created our brains to learn languages. So those four skills are very important to engage them to learn, to retain them, because it's one thing to go through a course. We have this story now where 90%, and this is based on research. David Miller wrote a book on the Greek pedagogy in crisis. He said that 90% of people who learn Greek after 5 years do not use the language anymore or
Wow,
don't know
that's
the
a
language
very
anymore.
high percentage.
Yeah, and so it's is pedagogy in crisis for sure. So why is that happening? I think one part of the reason is because we learn a lot of grammar rules, and our knowledge is passive. Passive knowledge is not good for retention. It doesn't stay long in our brains because we have just used half of the skills that are required to learn a language.
Mm,
So when we engage these four skills, retention is better.
mhm.
Long term, we call it the long term memory. So we have three memories. We have the sensory memory, we have the working memory, and we have the long term memory. What we're trying to do in the first second semesters of Greek is that we're trying to help students to learn vocabularies and also learn grammar, learn the language, and store them in the long term memory. So when they read a text, they can retrieve those vocabularies or syntactical or grammar knowledge, whatever, to be able to process the language well. And
Mm.
so, in a communicative approach, what happens is we use all of those four skills from day one, where people are listening, people are speaking, and at the beginning very slowly, the way we emphasize listening more so that they have more input, then reading, and eventually writing the language. And so one of the key difference between a grammar class and a communicative class is this. I've taught with both, and so I know, at least in my experience, I teach a language, the language, and 80% of the time I'm speaking in English and talking about Greek. It's singular, it's plural, it does this, and it's still knowledge, it's still good. But in a communicative approach now, we spend 90% or 95% of the time in Greek. And then so that's a huge difference on input, vocabulary acquisitions. So engaging the four skills has advantage in many ways.
So how do we see this measure? Because our final goal of teaching the biblical languages is so that people can read it. So then surely reading is way more important than the other skills. I mean, how and it's kind of like nerdy fun if I can write you a letter in Hebrew, and you can actually read it. But what's the point of that? Would you say the other three are kind of like supportive to the reading, or is that an unfair way of putting it?
I think it's all connected. It's all connected. We cannot do one. For instance, Paul Nation, an expert on second language acquisition, he said you have to divide the class into listening, reading, speaking, writing. That's how you best learn the language. You cannot use one more. You cannot just speak and speak for and then not listen. It doesn't work
Mm,
without a whole package. At least that's what research have shown. And so when it comes to again the question about how do this contribute to exegesis, that's a, that's an important question, and then sometimes we laugh about this, but the question assumes that we're doing something else
mm,
with our classes.
yeah.
We're doing something else, or our goal is something else. No, like our goal is exegesis. Our as as Bible students, our goal is exegesis. From day one, we write this on our course description that our goal is exegesis. Our goal is reading, not some speaking. I like the idea. I have a few friends in Italy and elsewhere. We can have a whole conversation in Greek, and it's fun.
Mhm.
It's fun. To do that.
Yeah.
But that's not the goal at all. Speaking is never the goal. It's a tool. But again, it's not just speaking. It's just 25%. We're thinking about engaging all other sense. But speaking does have a way of engaging the rest of the other skills.
Mm, mm,
And so, how do this contribute to exegesis? One of the prerequisite, people define exegesis, I think, differently, but a broad definition would be the critical analysis of a text
mm,
to interpret it, or to a critical interpretation of a text in any field, not just in biblical studies, but in any field. To interpret a text, the prerequisite is to be able to read
mm.
fluently.
Yeah.
Because if you cannot read, how can you analyze that?
Yeah.
But so reading reading is a prerequisite. And so this is important because in reading, but now we have to ask, what happens in reading? What does it mean by reading? Yeah, because there is a difference between reading and translation or decoding. It's interesting because decoding is a process in reading, but decoding is not reading, but it is a process. So broadly
Can you
speaking, so we have
explain that a bit more? Can you give a practical example, maybe?
yeah. So we have three memories. Let's start with our brain. I'm not an expert on this, but I've read a few literature on this. We have sensory memory, and then we have the working memory. We have the long-term memory. In reading, what is happening is amazing how our brain process information. So we read. That is, with our senses, we read. So when we're reading, what is happening is our working memory is the cognitive ability that is happening, that is working the moment you are reading. In that, this working memory is limited. It has limited storage, and the long-term memory is unlimited. So in long-term memory, what happens is whatever you have learned, vocabularies and all those stays there. So in reading, what the working memory does is the working memory will pick up things from the senses and retrieve information from the long-term memory. And then in this working, as you're reading, the working memory is functioning. In reading, there are processes. There are mainly two processes. One is, they call it the lower processes and the higher processes. In the lower processes, what is happening in the lower process is, the orthography, recognizing the letters, phonology, how do you pronounce it? And the morphology, what does it mean? What does the word mean? And the syntax, what is this word doing? Is it a singular or plural? How is it related? So that is technically decoding. Yeah, decoding is you're looking, you're reading, and you are processing as a singular, plural. That is decoding, and that is part of the lower process. And so all of those are, and the prosody of the language, those are lower process. And the higher process is comprehension and analysis.
Right.
But so in that, the key thing is that these lower processes, all of this, like the sound, the meaning, the syntax, all of those, this has to be automatic for reading to happen. Because in a working memory, what is happening is it has limited space. So now, if this, you would like, for instance, let's say a Greek example would be Romans 1:1. I'm teaching reading through with some of my students. So he's saying, Paulos doulos Christou Iesu, kletos apostolos phorismenos eis evangelion tu Theou. So what is happening here is, in that is Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, the apostle called and separated for the gospel of God. So when when reading that, a student is reading that, is in Paulos, it's nominative. Doulos, it's nominative. So that's going to get a Christou Iesu, that's genitive. So of Jesus Christ. So that's decoding, and everybody does that. Even people who actively knows the language does that. The difference is, if a student is taught how to only decode, he is spending all of his energy and all of his working brain power to process that. And while they're processing it, the working memory finishes. There's no more power. It gets overloaded.
Right.
And I know this exactly because I was reading Greek, the New Testament before, and then I read through the sentence, and I just got lost somewhere.
Yes.
I just got lost, and I don't know why. And I get frustrated. I know now because my working memory just got exhausted.
Yes.
And so what is happening there is, in reading, all of those has to be automatic. When I say Paulos doulos Christou Iesu, kletos apostolos, then my brain is still decoding the language, but it's doing automatically because I'm trained now to use the language automatically and actively. And so now I still have brain power to do interpretation and analysis and all of those. And so
would you say that the decoding always comes from the long term? It's
yes,
like
yes,
you automatic understanding of what this actually means in its simple sense always comes from the long-term memory.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And in that, the important thing is that even a person learning just grammar can have the word in the long-term memory, just that it's not automatic. There's a difference. So in communicative approach, student is taught to say, when he say Paulos, doulos, Christou Iesu, he's not stopping and thinking, oh, it's nominative or it's singular, it's genitive. No, he's not stopping. He's doing that, but our brains are normally processing that in milliseconds that we don't know. So training a student to automatically know that, one of the key thing is to speak, for them to actively produce the language. Because when we're speaking, we don't have time to think about it is a singular or plural, or we just use it. And then in the in the process, like in 2 semesters, they started processing the language actively, and uh, so yeah, coming back and then reading, and that's how it is the process of reading. And so reading is a prerequisite for exegesis. So normally when I did exegesis before in seminary, 70% of my time is just spent on, whether it's a singular, how is the syntax, how is this related to this one. But now I don't need to do that because I can read it. I can
Yeah.
read it and then process it. And also there's
Yeah.
something yeah, there is also something called as the phonological loop, which is our brain processes the sound and the meaning, and it's very limited. Someone said that our brain can process around 10 words or, backwards. And so if you're not reading fast enough, your brain doesn't remember. You have to go back. You have to go back
Right.
and,
Right.
and read. And so it's
Yeah.
counterintuitive a bit because we think if you read slowly, we will understand better. But actually, if you read faster, then you understand better
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's how our brain functions. And so,
So
the
I'm just reminded that, just to maybe give an English example also to what you are saying, the difference between reading, decoding, and interpreting what the message is saying. So for instance, this morning I said to my husband, I'm going to Tyndale. And what actually I'm saying, because he knew I was going to go to Tyndale, but what I'm saying is I'm leaving now. I'm taking the car. you know, if you want to phone me within 30 minutes, you can expect me to be in the car.
yeah,
After that, because I've told you we're going to be recording this thing. So, what I'm actually saying, the interpretation of my message is don't try to reach me for the coming 2-3 hours, solve your own problems. That's basically the meaning of what I'm saying. But the words I'm using is I'm going to Tyndale. And I think that's also a good example of how things mean something in their context, because
yeah,
obviously the context
yeah,
here is I've told
yeah,
him what I'm going to be doing.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
I think this is a very clear example of, if we overload our working memory, if there's nowhere near enough of the knowledge of the language in the long-term memory, then that overloads, it gives us a constant burnout. And I've also heard students complain that for an exegesis exam, they say, oh, we have to be able to translate any passage out of the book of Zephaniah. And I'm thinking, that's only 3 chapters, that's not a big deal, But, if you look at it this way, if you get stuck on the decoding, then yes, you're completely burnt out. Your working memory is completely burnt out and you don't get round to the actual exegesis.
Yeah. So the key difference is that people say in communicative approach, you're not decoding. Actually, we're decoding, but we're just decoding automatically.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, and then because decoding is not the goal, fluency is. Speaking is not the goal, fluency is. And but so can a person who learns Greek grammar read the New Testament? Of course, through repeated exposure. Or if a person has 3 semesters of Greek, they would be able to read, but it will be very effortful. It will take a lot of effort because he has to go back or she has to go back 4 or 5 times to make sense of the sentence. The person who knows actively would just read through that, would have read 5 chapters while this guy is trying to decode 5 verse.
Yeah. And so the process of the speaking and of the writing um, supports that process of shifting the knowledge into the long-term memory, because you make the synapses, you are linking it to more information. And in the writing also, we use our bodies. So we get our bodies involved, which is a different part of the brain again from, hearing is over here, seeing, the reading is over here, using your body to form the words is over here, and so that sort of really strengthens that bond.
Yeah. And also, yeah, we have to mention that in communicative approach, that's the key difference again in grammar translation. Normally, we would just stick with the book most of the time, and some teachers can get really creative. That's a different thing. But generally, but in a communicative approach, we use a lot of images. We use songs, we use videos, we do character playing in because the communicative approach opens up that. And so it's not just speaking, but all of those techniques are used. Like you said, popularly the TPR, total physical response. So I go lambano to poterio and I'm taking a cup or I go grafo. So we're using our bodies because those are important to store the knowledge in the long-term memory. So, and I think it's generally true. Like if you would speak a language, it's harder to forget than
Mm.
just knowing about a language and forgetting it, you know?
Yes, yes. Now, if we put all this together, someone has asked me, are you choosing for this teaching method because you believe that the grammar translation method is wrong?
Yeah. Huh. Uh, you have to be careful.
Yes.
I don't think I'm not an expert on, language acquisition per se. I know I've experienced and I've read a bit, but the, mm, the grammar learning is not wrong. Like I said, decoding is not wrong because we do that. We learn grammar, we decode. Just that the way it is done, and the we have to take into consideration the entire field. There is an entire field, probably even bigger than, probably or equally big as, biblical studies, which is second language acquisition. People have spent their life just researching how people learn language. What is the
Yes.
best way to learn languages?
Yes.
And they're saying, oh, you need to use these four skills. You need to include comprehensible input. You need to use this. But then we cannot sit back and say, no, we don't need to use that because it's a Greek, it's Greek or Hebrew. And so I don't think there is a wrong way of learning languages. It's just that different methods produce different results in different
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And again, the goal of grammar translation is to decode. It's interesting. I just saw a friend of mine putting up, learn to decode the New Testament, come learn Greek with me. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But so the goal is decoding in grammar translation. In communicative approach, and again, there are some nuances to it, but decoding is not the goal, it's just part of the process. And even the lower process where it's automatic, where, somebody was, a guy, I don't remember his name, he said, Latin is not a dead fish you put on a table to dissect. It's a language.
Yeah.
And so, it comes to how it really plays out in the classroom. Really, like for me, what is important is the different theories are important now, and I'm reading through them. But what is really important is what really happens in the class.
Hmm.
Can have all these theories. This is good, this is good. It's important, and I've read through them. I've tried different things. But what is really important to me is what happens in the class. Uh, so in that results of me teaching with grammar translation and now actively, one of the things, there are a few, and then I want to mention as we go to a close. One is students enjoy Greek and they stay for more.
Hmm.
One of the key things, so I always tell the best method in learning a language is consistency. You need to just stay till the end.
Hmm.
And so with a communicative approach, because we're speaking, we are looking at images, not just grammar rules and memorizing, but we're engaging students. We're not lecturing, but we're engaging. People are making mistakes, and then we're laughing at each other, and then the language is just fun. And the more mistakes we make, the more we're laughing at each other. And so students enjoy Greek. The process of, everybody's, in some ways traumatized by Greek and Hebrew. Every time they share a testimony, you hear, I took Greek and Hebrew in seminary. That's the story of every pastor, But what it shouldn't be like that. It can be your favorite subject. It is my favorite subject. It can be your favorite subject. You can
Yeah.
enjoy it actually. And then students enjoy Greek. So when I was teaching with GT, they just want to finish my course and pass the exam. Sir, make it easy. Let us pass. We want to finish it. But in the last 3 years, I've had, like, for instance, in Warsaw, Baptist Theological Seminary, we were supposed to do 2 semesters with students, but I said, no, we want more. We want
Hmm.
more. And then we did
Right.
till Greek 4, and we're still reading Romans now with them.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they were supposed to take 2 semesters, but we say we want more. And so students stay, more in the class. The second thing is vocabulary acquisition, because it's important, because if you don't know the word, regardless of the method you use, you're not going to be able to read. You have to know the vocabulary.
Yeah.
So when I was teaching with grammar translation, in 2 semesters, my student would learn around 300 or 350 words, because that's what the textbook gives, and nothing more than that. And
Hmm.
in 2 semesters, they'll finish that standard book like Mons. It's around 350. In a class, like now in my class currently, students learn up to 700, minimum 700, but close to 1,000 words in 2 semesters.
Wow.
But why? How is that possible?
Wow.
It's just basic, because we speak, Greek 90% of the time. Or
Yeah.
in a grammar translation, we use English 80% of the time. And
Yeah.
so we don't have time to think about a language. But now they're repeatedly exposed to the language. And as they say, there's a Latin quote saying, repetition is the mother of memory.
Hmm.
And so you just repeat all the time. And 90% the class is in Greek. You just keep hearing and hearing. They just learn because they're hearing. And so
So
the
you get
vocabulary
far
acquisition.
more repetition in a shorter period of time.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's vocabulary acquisition is one. And then I think the difference is, people, they will, because they engage the four senses, they know they're more confident about the language. By the end of the first semester, they're able to say basic sentences in Greek confidently. Oh, they're not thinking, they're not worried about when I took, 4 semesters of Greek, I was always doubting my translation. Is it right
Hmm.
translation or did I miss something? Because I passively know the language, but I see the key difference in my students, they're just very confident with what they know because they just know. And another key thing is a quick transition to authentic text and biblical text. In a direct method and inductive method, from the first class, they're reading the textbook we use is a novel first published by Oxford, and then the sentence says, "Dikaiopolis Athenaios estin oikeidei, o Dikaiopolis ukentais Athenais alain tois agrois, auturgos gar estin." So that's the first paragraph. They are getting used to reading like real authentic text, like
Yeah.
adapted. The brains are getting used to that. It's not a list of vocabulary that they have at the end of the chapter when they say agathos, it's good, anthropos, man. They're not doing that, but they're reading it. So the brain just gets wired to read authentic text more. Another thing is people are worried about exams all the time, but in the communicative approach, every class is an exam. Because I would say Paulos doulos Christou Jesu, like say we're reading Romans, or that's a very basic sentence. So I would say tis estin ho Paulos, which means who is Paul? Now that's Paulos estin doulos, and then Tinos doulos estin. Whose
Hmm.
servant is it? To Christou Jesu. So in the class, we are doing this test all the time. The
Right.
quiz is
Right.
this engagement. And so the exams, like the exam is nobody's worried about exam in my class now, right? Because
Hmm.
like, I'm not going to say things that we didn't discuss in the class, and what we have discussed in the class, they know. It's not
Yeah.
some rules that they have to memorize. I mean, they still have to learn and do it automatically, but that was one of the key difference that I've seen because I had a struggle of my students failing in exam and then there's retake and they have to repeat it. I am glad I don't have that anymore. But the reading ability, the automaticity, and also another thing is we set students up to be lifelong learners.
Yes.
Because 2 semesters or 3 semesters is not enough
Hmm.
to be good at the language. And most of our students are only going to learn 2 to 3 semesters. So, but teaching them to be active and to be fluent in basic conversation in the present tense. So, and then retaining them in the long-term memory, it just sets them up for lifelong learning. Because if you learn about some rules, most likely you're not going to remember those rules anymore.
Yeah. No, that's true.
If somebody is speaking about the experience and they know actively they want to develop that, and even the development becomes natural, I think we set them up better for lifelong learners. So those are the things why I would use this method. Yeah. But I turn your question into something else. But
No, don't worry. Don't worry. This is perfect.
this
So
there is
let's talk a little bit about TAAL. So what are we going to be offering at TAAL? What are we, at least to begin with, what are we offering and what are we hoping to grow towards?
yeah. So for some people who are listening, TAAL is the Tyndale Academy of Ancient Languages, where Nelleke is the director and Hebrew instructor, and I am the Greek instructor. That's what we're doing. We are offering Greek and Hebrew. I will speak for the Greek. Starting January, we are offering Greek one, which will start from the beginning, from the basics. And from day one, you will read, listen, speak, and write Greek. And we have also Greek language and pedagogy. And this is I'm very excited about this. This is for teachers, for Greek teachers around the world, and for students who have an MTH or at least have an MDiv with 3 to 4 semesters of Greek, and you want to learn the language and you want to teach the language in an effective way. And then this is the course for you, where we will be learning the language actively, but also talking about principles of teaching the language. And I know a lot of people, and because I've done this before, I have a lot of students right now who are using a grammar translation textbook. They're using Mounts, or they're using Plummer, or they're using Machen or Wenham. But there is no, like, if you use grammar translation, you cannot use those techniques. There's no such things like that, You can be using mounts, and then you can be using images to, there are techniques. There's no one approach that is perfect, but I teach now teachers how to use images, how to, even when they're using a GT textbook, how they can use those techniques, so I teach them techniques, how to teach a language, how to keep the class exciting. And so that's Greek pedagogy one. And then from there, we have a lot of readings. So you will have the chance to look at it at the website. We will put it down somewhere when we post this.
Yes. And so we will also start in January Hebrew one in a similar way. I'm slightly less experienced than Mezhe in this living language approach, but I do have experience with it. And one of the things that I always try to bring in the lessons is a lot of fun, because if you learn with fun, then it's far easier to remember things.
It is.
If you can link it to a positive emotion, it's like 7 to 10 times easier to remember something. And our ultimate goal is also to equip Christians to be able to interpret the Bible, not just understand and decode, but to interpret the Bible from the original languages. We also want to equip Bible translators worldwide, and we also want to support and equip those teaching the biblical languages in seminaries, particularly if you are from the global south, but just
Ooh,
as
yes.
much people from the West, as we traditionally call it. Please join us to learn together and to have fun together with the biblical languages, because they really are a lot of fun.
It is. It is. That's what I do with my life, and then if I don't enjoy it, I wouldn't be doing it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And then there are possibilities. All of the courses for January are online. So you can be in any part of the world, but you should be able to join. And also for those that need, we do have scholarships available, especially for those, I think, that are in the global south. And so I would encourage everybody to write to us and then
Yes.
we have informations on the website, but we have more information than the website.
Yes.
No,
Just
I
send us
get
an
in my
email and we can tell you all about it.